Hello and welcome. I'm Esra Akcan, the director of the Institute for European Studies at the Einaudi Center for International Studies. Thank you for joining our webinar, EU to Bosnia, Refugee, Reparations, and Global Apartheid. I will pass the word to our moderator immediately, but let me say a few words about the event series where this panel is taking place. This panel is organized as part of the IES migration series that has been continuing since fall 2017, conceptualized as the migration of not only people, but also images, words, ideas, technologies, objects, information, seeds, plants, foods, and so on. This event series unpacked the historical and contemporary relevance of migration in writing global histories and understanding the present. It put Europe in its global context by discussing the continent as a place of both arrival and departure. This critically acknowledged European countries' role in the history of modernization and colonization of other countries within and outside Europe. And it also disclosed the region's character as an immigrant continent and diaspora of various peoples. The theme of our series in this academic year has been repair and reparations. And let me share our poster with you. We have been thinking together about several aspects of this theme in today's context, as the question of reparations has a newfound relevance in the United States, and as current public health and related crises continue to produce anxiety, and moreover, as the question of repairs from climate change-related disasters looms in our planet's future. Today's panel, EU to Bosnia, is the final one in Repair and Reparation series, but we have already organized the panels Hagia Sophia, Perspectives from Cultural Heritage, Beirut Reconstructions, Repatriation of Museum Objects, Belgium to Congo, Colonialism Reparation, Germany to Germany, New Perspectives on Post-War, Post-Unification and Post-Colonial Reparations, USSR to Post-Soviet Russia, Reparations or Repression for Stalin's Victims, and North to South, Repair and Reparations for Climate Refugees. The recordings of these panels are on our website, so you may watch them if you have missed them. So even though the Repair and Reparation series is coming to an end today, we do have one more panel on April 30, organized as part of the MESA Global Academy events that IES is partnering. In the face of the repression of academic freedoms, hundreds of scholars have sought possibilities for continuing their critical work abroad. Beginning in early 2016, in collaboration with the Office of the Vice Provost, we have initiated programs to provide a safe space for scholars at risk of persecution in their home countries. So we have hosted 7 long-term and short-term scholars and organized several panels with both our scholars and in participation with similar organizations, such as the MESA Global Academy based in the US and Academy in Exile based in Germany. So please do join our final webinar on April 30 with the Global Academy. So to say a few words about the procedure for today, our moderator, Saida, will soon introduce the panel, and each of our speakers will make their presentation. Upon the conclusion of these presentations, there will be a Q&A, and you will be able to submit your question for this portion by writing them in the Q&A tool that you can see at the bottom of your screen. Before we start, let me extend sincere thanks to our team, Pamela Hampton and Jason Ford, for their smooth execution of all our events, as well as our student workers and ambassadors, Alp Demiroğlu, Meili Burks, Natalia Gulik, and Andrew Lim, who helped with the social media posts, graphic design, and student participation for our series. I'm very much looking forward to the presentations and the following discussion, and I thank our moderator, Saida, for organizing and moderating such a timely panel, and our speakers for accepting our invitation. So the panel, as I said, will be moderated by Saida Hodzic, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies. She works on women's rights activism, NGO advocacy, humanitarianism, and civic environmental activism. Her books and courses are on the intersections of feminism, global health, human rights, governance, and engaged anthropology in order to address pressing political concerns and pay equal attention to critical theory, ethnographic inquiry, intersectional analysis, and movements for social justice. Saida, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Esra. Thank you to everybody for coming today. I would like to open today's panel with a few words of my own, and will then introduce the speakers. When winter arrives and brings snow to the hills and valleys of northwestern Bosnia, so do foreign volunteers and photographers. They come to document and support the refugees who are stranded, or more precisely, kept captive in camps near the border between Bosnia and the European Union. Now that the spring is here, and the refugees' condition is no longer as catastrophic as sensational, the world's attention will wane, but the ordinary disaster will remain unchanged. The shift from a spectacular to an ordinary catastrophe mirrors the condition of post-war Bosnia itself, a country of the displaced, as does the misrecognition of a political death drive for a humanitarian crisis. Refugees repeatedly try to cross into the EU until they succeed, give up, or die. They're intercepted by militarized Croatian border police that insults them, robs them, strips them naked, tortures them, assaults them, and expels them back into Bosnia at gunpoint. These violent expulsions are commonly called pushbacks, but the notion of pushbacks hardly does justice to the mechanisms of capture and violence. It takes more than one try to make it into Croatia, and more than making it to Croatia to successfully file an asylum claim. Refugees can make it to Slovenia, Italy, or Austria, and may still be expelled from the EU without having had the opportunity to apply for asylum, despite its status as a universal human right that is ostensibly enshrined in international law. Who should be held accountable for the captivity, violence, abuse, neglect, and deaths of refugees at the Bosnia-EU border? Some point the blame at the Croatian police or Bosnia's dysfunctional government, the local, most visibly responsible institutions. Yet refugees who try to move past the EU-Bosnia border belong to the 80 million people who are displaced today. Nearly half of them have been displaced by US wars and occupations. This should matter for those of us who live in this country. Meanwhile, the US and other countries that once accepted refugees for resettlement now work hard and spend a lot of money on preventing them from ever stepping foot on their shores, and therefore disabling them from lodging asylum claims. In doing so, they also restrict the refugees' mobility and detain them, both within the country, such as in the US, and far away from it. The US had first used the Guantanamo base to detain Haitian refugees. Australia has detained them on Nauru and Manus Islands. And the EU has granted billions of euros to military and detention industries, making deals that involve the EU, large European companies, and countries surrounding the EU borders, such as Turkey, Libya, and various Balkan countries, as well as far-flung ones. These policies are only one piece of a larger geopolitical formation that Catherine Besteman, one of our speakers, calls militarized global apartheid. In our conversation today, we take the Bosnia-EU border as a vantage point for analyzing what exactly that means. Our goal today is to attend to the specificities of the Bosnia-EU border and to place them within a world historical context. Framings matter. Where we place the conceptual boundaries of the problem matters for how the problem is defined and how it might be addressed. The EU-Bosnia border is neither a humanitarian nor a security problem, but a geopolitical formation. We cannot understand it without attending to global apartheid and its constitutive elements, regional and global racisms, regional and global xenophobia, regional and global Islamophobia, the politics of capitalism, and international and humanitarian governance cut across all of these, as does militarization. Wars kill, and the militarization of borders kills. Since 1993, when the EU opened its internal borders but shut the external ones, more than 40,000 people have died at the EU borders. These numbers are getting smaller now because fewer refugees are attempting the journey, but notably the percentages of refugees who die are rising. Between 2015 and 2018, the percentage of refugees who died increased fivefold, whereas in 2015, 0.37% of refugees crossing the Mediterranean died. In 2018, it was almost 2%, 1 in 50. Refugee deaths are not incidental. They're anticipated and intended to serve as deterrents. The EU counts on refugees dying, and it's no longer possible to draw a neat distinction between letting die and killing. Today's panel examines militarized global apartheid that materializes at the EU-Bosnia border, not as a stain on an ostensibly pristine European or world consciousness, but its ever-present underside. It also asks to refuse global apartheid and to work toward what may seem impossible, namely its undoing. Our speakers approach the topic from different vantage points and perspectives. I'm very pleased to introduce to you our panel of experts, advocates, and passionate thinkers. Nidžara Ahmetašević is an independent scholar, journalist, and activist, and the author of many articles, essays, and reports, including The Dark Side of Europeanisation, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the European Border Regime, and People on the Move in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2018, Stuck in the Corridors to the EU. Catherine Besteman is the Francis F. Bartlett and Ruth K. Bartlett Professor of Anthropology at Colby College and the author of 4 books and many edited volumes, including her most recent book, Militarized Global Apartheid. Azra Hromadžić is an O'Hanley faculty scholar and associate professor of anthropology at Syracuse University and the author of Citizens of an Empty Nation, Youth and State-Making in Post-War Bosnia and Herzegovina. We will first hear Nidžara Ahmetašević's presentation titled Bosnia and Herzegovina on the Balkan Route, Forever No Man's Land. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you very much, Saida. Thank you for the invitation to speak. And thank you for this great introduction, which will allow me to skip through some things and not to go back and explaining the reasons why we have so many people today on the Balkan route. I'm at the moment in Sarajevo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where since 2018, at any given moment, at least 5,000 people are stuck in between EU borders. Most of them are living in unbearable conditions inside the camps created and funded by the EU through their partner agencies in Bosnia. And what is happening in Bosnia at the borders is extremely painful, very re-traumatizing for people who survive war in Bosnia, and very difficult, I have to say, to understand, even harder to explain to somebody this, what I'm watching and that I'm part of every day. And it's not only about migrants that it's so hard to understand, but in general, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a state, or better to say country, because the state doesn't exist here, which one professor of law from Sarajevo, Zdravko Grebo, used to call a Frankenstein state. So through my presentation at the beginning, I will try to show you what the Balkan route is, how it goes, through what countries it's going on and it passes, and to explain you a little bit, to give you a picture of that ugly Frankenstein where I live and where all these people are at the moment stuck. So, sorry. Okay. So this is picture, and I love this picture, I have to say. This is one of many squats in Bihać. It's a former factory built during the socialism, during Yugoslavia. And the picture that you see, the painting on the wall, is a painting of Marshal Josip Broz Tito, who was a lifelong president of the country that was quite happy place to live for many people. And what is written on the wall is that we swear to a Tito that we will never change the path that he gave to us, to put it in that way. The factory is destroyed during the war, even more after the war, with the criminal privatization that is happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like many transition and post-war countries. And at the moment, several hundred people are forced to stay inside this ruined building and to pretend that they are living while they dream about crossing into the EU and hoping that one day they will have a normal chance to live their life like everybody else. They dream about being equal to the people from the north, west, and the rest of the world, but their dreams are crushed every day, being by the local police, being by the border police, or by the rules and regulation imposed upon everybody at this moment from the northern Western countries. This is the Balkan route, and this is the picture I find from February 2016, and it changed a lot since then. If some of you probably remember that back in 2014 and 2015, the Balkan route, which exists for centuries, and that was always the route for goods and people going from south up to the north. And in 2015, it became very busy, and more than 1 million people passed through the Balkans. And at that moment, the humanitarian corridor existed, which existed in a very strange way, and in the first place allowed the passing of people who are coming from Syria and a little bit from Afghanistan, creating the image that only right refugees or real refugees are those coming from Syria. Nobody talked about the reasons why suddenly you have more than 1 million people trying to cross the Balkan route. Never mind, the corridor lasted even less than 1 year, and then it became a very different. Suddenly, what was an open corridor became a land fortified with buyers, with guns, with dogs, with violence, and with walls. And the Balkan route was closed officially. Final closure of the route was in March 2016, when the EU signed a deal with Turkey, which from then on allowed them to push back people toward Turkey, to stop them from going onward toward the European Union and European countries. At that moment, many people were stuck in Serbia, and they were trying to cross into the EU 3 ways, being Hungary, Bulgaria, or Croatia. All of these ways with the time showed as a very, very dangerous. However, in November 2017, event happened that I kind of like see as one of the most important moments on the Balkan route, when that signified the start of the massive violence that we are living even now and witnessing even now. And that was the murder, and I'm using that word by purpose, of the 6-year-old Madina Husseini, a girl from Afghanistan who was traveling with her big family, trying to cross from Serbia to Croatia. They were pushed back, and on their way back to Serbia, they had to cross the train tracks. Suddenly, the train was approaching them. The rest of the family managed to be quick enough and to jump or run far away from the train tracks. Madina didn't, and she was killed. And later on, after many complications, Her body was buried at the end of the local graveyard in Šid in Serbia, and it took to her family, it took months and months for them to finally reach European Union, and they done it in irregular way because that was the only way for them, even after they lost their daughter. However, this murder committed by Croatian police and EU border guards opened lots of issues and was a kind of like a signal to everybody who is on the route that this is not the way they will cross and this is not the way they will enter EU. So from that moment on, and this is November 2017, as I said, many people decided finally to turn their route toward Bosnia and Herzegovina. Since 2014, Bosnia and Herzegovina was not active part on the so-called Balkan route. Some people did cross through Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Montenegro or Kosovo, but in general, even Albania was considered as a too difficult road, and people were avoiding it. Bosnia and Herzegovina was a country that many avoided also because of what is left in Bosnia after the war. And in the first place, I'm talking about landmines. Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the 10 countries in the world with the biggest number of landmines. So people were avoiding it. However, this murder of the girl from Afghanistan forced them to try and to enter this part of the Balkan route, which it has one of the longest land border with the EU, giving them many possibilities to cross. However, they came into completely dysfunctional country, where nobody was ready for their arrival. Nobody was interested, and it's not until today. And practically the only side who wanted to do something with the people on the move on this part of the Balkan route was European Union. And what they wanted to do is to stop people or to create conditions that will make them stop or not even to leave their countries and go toward the European Union. Nevertheless, I have to explain you what Bosnia and Herzegovina is, this Frankenstein. So this is it. This is a map made at the end of the 1995, the end of the war. The war in Bosnia and Herzegovina started in 1992 and was ended with a peace agreement signed Dayton, Ohio, US, and signed and constructed by Western powers, while the politicians from Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region didn't have much choice, basically, but the sign, luckily, I have to say. Nevertheless, the peace agreement recognized the wartime established borders, and since the war, or since the end of the war, Bosnia has two entities. One is Republika Srpska, the second one is Bosnia Croat Federation, and we also have district city of Brčko, which is very small area. And honestly, there is no obvious reason to have any of this, but we do have it and we pretend it's okay. Together with these divisions of the state, the Dayton Peace Agreement created also extremely complicated state. This is how Bosnia looks like away from the maps. And I have to remind you that we have a presidency with 3 members who are rotating every 8 months for the period of 4 years. And then it goes down on different levels. Each of these levels has its presidents, members of the parliament, and we are not sure how many, but we believe that we have more than 120 ministers. Each one of them has its own cabinet with everything that comes with it. So as you can see, it's extremely complicated and extremely expensive. And it makes us who are living in this country very often confused, because when we have some issues, when we have some problems, we do not know to whom to address them, to what level of the government, because everything is so complicated. Just to give you the example, we are one of the few countries in the world who until today, we do not have vaccines that are ordered by the representatives of the government. The simple reason is because it was so hard for them to understand who will do that at the end they decided to leave us without vaccines or to hope that somebody will donate us. And that's what's happening now, but the vaccination is not happening. One day it will, as we hope, because we are receiving gifts from other countries a little by little. And we are dying in huge and big numbers. Nevertheless, beside all these levels of government, or at the top of all these levels, we have something that is called Office of the High Representative. This is a mandate, as you can see on the screen, of this Office of the High Representative. But to put it in a very simple way, High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is appointed by the UN Security Council, has the ultimate power. He or she, it was always he, and since the end of the war, we had 8 high representatives, all of them Europeans. Deputy is always American. But with these powers, they practically can do anything they want in the country. The only body which is really kind of like above the high representative, and there are no, like, people of Bosnia have nothing to say in all this, is the Peace Implementation Council and its steering board. And it has 55 countries. When they are making any decision about Bosnia, these 55 countries have to agree on. And what we have noticed over the years is that very often this PIC, as we call it, Peace Implementation Council, was rather led by the interest of the member countries of the Peace Implementation Council than by the interest of people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nevertheless, after the war and after the peace agreement was signed, many conferences were held. Every time in the first place, people from the international community were present. If the locals were present, they could not influence decisions that were made by the international community. But the most important meeting was held in Bonn, Germany in 1997. And since then on, High Representative really became the supervisor of the country with unlimited power. And kind of like I can say that from that moment on, Bosnia and Herzegovina until today became semi-protectorate. In practice, we don't exist. We are country, we are some space that do exist, but politically it's very hard to find your way to Bosnia and to understand what's happening and whose interest is the one that matters at any given moment. Some describe this what this country is at this moment as a state capture or a frozen state. And what I can say that this kind of very strange situation allows any kind of corruption, bad politicians who at this moment in Bosnia are also holding on power only with playing the games with Dayton Peace Agreement and all these different powers given to them and given to international community over the years. But practically we have corrupted and crooked elites who are not nationalists anymore, but who are just people who are doing everything they can. And when I say everything, it's really everything to stay in the position of power. And the international community do not see that as a problem, or they see it nominally, but they really don't do anything to help the citizens to regain the power and to live in democracy, even though they call democracy what we have in Bosnia today. Nevertheless, over the years, the international community experienced lots of problems in Bosnia. They realized sometimes that the experiment that they are doing failed. practically. So they started a new experiment. The new experiment is, let's take Bosnia and the region to EU. In order to take us to EU, they created something they call the stabilization and association process. And that process is very long, as we learned, complicated, and we have no idea where it will lead us or if it will lead us anywhere. What the process achieved since 2014 is that even the little bit of the state that we did have in 2004, today we don't. So there is nothing around here, but we do have corrupt politicians, easy to manipulate, and we have sealed borders and the laws that make this state and kind of like make it even more complicated. In this process, one of the very important points for all the time and until today was this stabilization, as they call it, and it is very often connected with fight against the terrorism, and that started after September 11 and everything that was happening in the US and around the world. And the Bosnia was, and the whole region was kind of the playground for this fight against terrorism. And in order for us to respond to this global threat that we never really felt, I have to say, we had to adapt a number of different laws. And most of these laws were related to issues of security and the border security. The laws like the one on asylum and the foreigners were created, as all the other laws that we have in Bosnia, by the international community. In this very specific case, the law on asylum and the foreigners was the UNHCR and not imposed, but the state government was willingly, or we don't know how, but they didn't have any other choice. They adopted it as it is. Today we can see that that law is not very good. Nevertheless, since 2014, when the EU decided the Balkans and the Bosnia will one day become part of the Union, they decided that they will put aside a little bit Office of the High Representative, not taking his powers, but just not making him not that visible as before. And they established a new body called EU Special Representative Office. We now have this EU Special Representative who do not have bone powers, but who is working in a close cooperation with OHR, and if needed, they can use the bone powers. For whatever reason, they stopped using it at some point, and it comes with the promise of the EU membership. However, I also have to tell you something which is very interesting for me. This Office of the EU Special Representative, that's the second biggest EU office outside of the EU. The first biggest, the big office of the EU is in Brussels. The second one is in Sarajevo. So it's very interesting for me that we have so big EU office. What I can see, and especially now, and especially since 2018, I can see that EU decided to put really a lot of effort in issues related to security, especially border security in the Balkans. And in 2018, we can see that more and more, and we can see how does that look like in practice, to put it in that way. And we can see that our border with the EU, because we are in between EU, became militarized. And what we can see every day, people who are coming back from these borders after pushbacks, and it looks horrible. And very often it reminds us of the war and what we went through during the war. This is what EU is doing in Bosnia. I have to tell you that since the state was not the state, whatever it is, was not ready in 2018 for what is happening, for this arrival of such a big number of people, the EU decided to take it over. And in June 2018, the EU decided that their partner, despite their partner in Bosnia, will not be the state, and that the existing laws will not lead them in what will happen in Bosnia over the time, but that the main partner will be associate agency of the UN, which is International Organization for Migration, who in this country is, in the name of the state, a leader of the process which EU is calling migration management. Since then on, IOM is deciding everything that has anything to do with the migrants in Bosnia. So I will give you just a short example of how does it look like. Like a couple of days ago, I found a person, a migrant who is living on the street in Sarajevo, and he has all the symptoms of COVID. I wanted to take him to do a test and to find help for him, a medical help. I lost a whole day calling different local institutions. All of them refused to give me any kind of help or to help to this person. And all what they were telling me is IOM has to do that. IOM wants to control everything in Bosnia that has anything to do with migrants. So they want me to send this person to go to the camp where around 4,000 people are living. In order for him to come to the camp, he needs to take a public transport, at least 2 vehicles. So it's very dangerous. And like what 2 of us decided at the end is that we are trying to do something without his help because he cannot move. Nevertheless, I show you one map. This is the map how Balkan route after Bosnia looks like for the people who are moving. I took the picture of one person who tried more than 20 times to enter European Union. And these are some of the roads he took to arrive to EU. Now he is in EU and he is safe. The second picture is a picture took by volunteers in Tuzla. It's one city, the first big city for people who are coming from Serbia to Bosnia and Herzegovina. In order for them to enter Bosnia, they have to cross big river, Drina, and many people died on this route so far. In 2019, in Tuzla, sometimes more than 100 people used to come during the day. And nothing was ready for them, no accommodation, no medical help, nothing. Just a people of Tuzla who show like such a huge solidarity, and that solidarity lives until today, that all of these people survived only thanking to people of Tuzla. These are pictures from, one is from Velika Kladuša, a village near Velika Kladuša, and it shows a family who just came after pushback. Everything was taken away from them, and when they finally felt safe, it was very close to the houses where people live. The only thing they have are these garbage bags, and as you can see, mother put her children in the bags because at least to keep them from freezing outside. The second picture is taken on the road. It's also close to Bihać, the city that is closest to EU and Croatia. This is a woman from Afghanistan who traveled or who tried more than 30 times. Finally, she and her little family arrived to Germany last year, and they were rejected, and they are afraid now they will be deported from Germany to Afghanistan, even though their life is in danger in Afghanistan. This is a map of Bosnia made by ICRC, and you can see how many temporary accommodation centers EU built in Bosnia. It's not many, but all of them are very ugly. And we describe them as concentration camps because that's the only thing how you can describe them. People inside of these camps do not have even basic living conditions. And these camps are ugly like they are by purpose, because this is the way to send the message to people that they are not welcome and that they should not come. This is at the entrance of one of the camps, Camp Izmiral, also near the border. And as you can see, EU and IOM are using every possibility to put their signs everywhere around so that people do know who is paying for this and who is responsible for this situation, but also like that they know that they're not welcome. This is a camp inside. As you can see, sometimes two people share one bed. Privacy doesn't exist. They don't have hot water. They don't have very often enough food, and conditions or like possibility to like now with the pandemic to keep all the measures, it just doesn't exist. I mean, to live, it's very hard. This is another camp. This one is in Sarajevo, and I mean, I think that the picture will tell you everything. Nevertheless, every time when we ask people, representative from IOM, why the camp are like this, they always say that it's not true what we are saying, that the conditions are not concentration camp-like, but that this is a European standard. I don't live in European Union, but in Bosnia, this is not a standard for anything. Nevertheless, also this is a European standard, and that is police violence. First, the police violence was only important, or was something that we could see at the borders. However, together with people, the violence was pushed inside Bosnia, and the police was not only encouraged to use the violence, but they're also equipped by the European Union. Because from about 100 million euros that arrived to Bosnia for IOM to manage migrations, much of that money went to different security sectors, including police, which is equipped in all over Bosnia by EU through the donations. I have to, and I will run now, but I have to show you one video, which will also is very good picture of how the camps look like inside. It's European standard too, and I think
we've lost her connection.
Maybe continue with Catherine.
Yeah, let's wait 10 seconds, and if she's not back, then we can go to Catherine and then back to Nidžara afterwards, if she has more to say. Okay, so while we're waiting for Nidžara to come back, I'd like to thank her and introduce our next speaker very briefly. Catherine Besteman will tell us about her work on militarized global apartheid. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks so much. I'm so honored and delighted to be here, and was sorry that Nidžara's presentation got shortened. I hope we can hear the rest of it before we finish up today. My role here is to offer a different framing, a different context. I start from a different position. I start in Somalia, and I have been working towards theorizing what I'm calling militarized global apartheid, this sort of larger macro frame in which some of these border skirmishes, border militarizations are being worked out. For the past couple of decades, I've been working with Somali refugees who were resettled to the US from Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps in Kenya. Tracking their efforts to try to find safety over the past 4 decades has made visible for me a structure of global apartheid backed by militaristic force, through which people from the global south are trying to navigate the borders, barriers, and violences imposed on them by governments and multilateral institutions based in the global north, such as what we've just been hearing about in Bosnia. So here, building from the experiences of the Somali refugees that I know, I'm going to be offering a very broad brush view of a world order in which race and mobility feature as primary variables, for which heightened security and militarization are seen as the answer. So I'm going to be sketching out some dimensions of this new world order, which I'm calling a militarized form of global apartheid. Basically, militarized global apartheid, as I'm using it, is a loosely organized effort by countries in the global north, by which I mean specifically the US, Canada, the EU, Israel, Australia, New Zealand, Russia, the Gulf states, and East Asia, to protect themselves against the mobility of people from the global south. The new apartheid apparatus takes the form of militarized border technologies and personnel, interdictions at sea, biometric tracking of the global, detention centers, holding facilities, refugee camps, and the criminalization of mobility. It extends deeply into many places from which people are attempting to leave and pushes them back. It tracks them to interrupt their mobility. It stops them at certain borders for detention and deportation. It pushes them into the most dangerous traveling routes, and it creates new forms of criminality. It stretches across most of the globe. It depends on an immense investment of capital, and it feeds a new global security industrial complex. Because the new apartheid relies on and nurtures xenophobic ideologies and racialized worldviews, it recasts the terms of sovereignty, citizenship, community, belonging, justice, refuge, and civil rights, and it requires the few who benefit to collectively and knowingly demonize and ostracize the many who are harmed. In the globalized contemporary, the emergence of a system of militarized apartheid used by wealthier and more powerful countries in the global north against people from the global south is the signature form of globalized structural violence of our era. Lots of other scholars have used the phrase global apartheid to describe the historic and current world order, arguing that from the age of exploration to the age of imperialism, to the colonial era, to the age of the Cold War, to the age of neoliberalism and the Washington Consensus, to the current moment, the global north has been consistently engaged in projects of racialization, segregation, political intervention, mobility controls, capitalist plunder, and labor exploitation of people in the global south. While terms like imperialism, globalization, and transnationalism have, I think, been really helpful for highlighting many important dimensions of these global processes, the term apartheid shifts the frame to capture the use of race and nativist language to structure mobility, belonging, elimination, and extermination, as well as the relevance of border controls and the hierarchical modes of excluding or incorporating racially delineated people into a polity for labor exploitation. My argument thus builds on this perspective by acknowledging the significance for this emergent world order of new forms of militaristic border security and containment. From 1948 to 1990, South Africa created the most extensive and extreme apartheid structure in the contemporary era. Apartheid is a legal edifice that mandates, constructs, and enforces the supremacy of one racial group over another. In South Africa, the apartheid system, supported by the National Party after its political victory in 1948, systematized white supremacy through policies and laws designed to manage the threat posed by Black people by incarcerating them in zones of containment while enabling their controlled and policed exploitation as workers upon whose labor South Africa was dependent. The set of policies that came to constitute apartheid in South Africa did not, of course, appear in 1948 as a newly designed model of social order, but rather they reflected and persistently expanded colonial era practices of racial identification and segregation, the restriction of voting rights to white people, divide and rule governance practices for Black people, and the exploitation of Black workers, all fundamental components of colonial intervention and control in South Africa that preceded the rise of the apartheid state under the National Party. As it unfolded in South Africa, apartheid contained 5 key elements. First, it relied on an essentialized cultural logic that tied people to place through racial and nativist ideologies and discourses. Second, ethno-racialized groups and their respective territories created through apartheid practices were made unequal because the territories inhabited by the subjugated were disenfranchised and impoverished by design. Third, the delineation of territorial belonging was reinforced by a bureaucratic system of identity documentation and mobility controls that perpetuated racialization. Fourth, in addition to being a system of identity management, racial segregation, and racial supremacy, apartheid was also critically about the control and exploitation of the labor of the subjugated. And fifth, because apartheid is exploitative, unfair, and unjust, its maintenance required a massive, pervasive, and expensive militarized security apparatus. Across all 5 elements was the role of the state in sanctioning through law and policy racial oppression as apartheid's distinguishing feature. So these elements, I'm arguing, are now taking shape systematically on a global scale through a constellation of policies and laws, many of which have roots in white settler and European colonialism and imperialism. So I'm going to briefly discuss each in turn, the applicability of each of these 5 pillars of apartheid to the global arena. First, cultural identity, nativism, and the people-territory link. Over the past century, political elites have worked to tie people to place, bolstering the idea that cultural and national identity roots people in particular geographical places where they are imagined naturally to belong. Tying people to place through the simultaneous creation of cultural identities linked to nation-state membership informed the idea, of course, of immigration and influx control, making mobility seem threatening to the consolidation of nationalist identities within politically delineated territorial borders. Rights to legal membership in the modern nation state have taken shape through the delineation of territorial borders, the extension of rights of membership based on logics of belonging defined by settler colonialism in the US, Canada, Australia, and Israel, through heritage and the particular population dynamics in playing under and following colonialism in Europe, the Gulf states, and East Asia, through also the management of documentation to identify who belongs and holds citizenship rights in the forms of passports and visas, and the identification and management of internal others who are temporary or permanent residents, but who are denied full citizenship rights. A chorus of scholars has carefully charted how these processes took shape over centuries of what Cedric Robinson has called racial capitalism, the systemic processes of exploitation and profit that characterized settler colonialism, plantation slavery, the displacement of indigenous people, and the creation of racialized mobile populations of immigrant indentured laborers and workers. Concurrently, official policy and populist rhetoric in countries across the global north cohered an understanding of belonging that enabled the delineation, containment, and exclusion of those defined as foreign others, those who don't really belong to the nation. Policing the mobility of those who don't really belong has become a primary occupation of states in the global north through a growing array of surveillance technologies that turn racialized bodies into borders to be monitored and interrupted. The second element of apartheid is the intentional effort by the apartheid state to render ordinary life unsustainable in areas designated for the racialized underclass, while also ensuring that the apartheid state maintains a hand in monitoring and managing such areas. Scholars have recorded the devastating impact on local lives in the global south of a wide variety of interventions by the global north, actions that followed and sometimes continued the decades of plunder by colonial extraction. These actions include things like military interventions, austerity regimes imposed by multilateral institutions based in the global north, corporate capitalist plunder, trade agreements that benefit the global north and hobble the global south, large-scale land acquisition for the production of biofuels, timber, and food crops held by entities in the global north, but extracting resources from the global south, and the disproportionate impact of climate change on the global south, for which the responsibility mostly lies at the feet of the global north. The aggressive penetration of neoliberal capitalism and capitalist plunder in the global south has created what some scholars call excess populations that are either to be captured for the market as cheap producers, exploitable workers, or temporary guest workers, or made expendable through forced removals and displacement, incarceration into refugee camps, or being allowed to sicken and die. The third pillar of apartheid is identity documentation and refusal or exclusion. In response to immigration panics, the global north has consolidated what some have referred to as a fortress operation through expanding deportations and tightening the requirements for allowing entry that reflect a clear geographic and racial bias. People in the global north who lack appropriate entry documents face a context analysts call crimmigration, immigration panics that conflate undocumented status with criminality or terrorism, drawing out racialized fears of immigrants and producing a surge of policing and surveillance to identify, incarcerate, and remove the undocumented. In the global north of today, just as in apartheid South Africa of the last century, states have embarked on programs of mass refusal and mass incarceration to discipline, punish, and remove from society undocumented racialized foreigners. Containment and refusal policies include the management of the international refugee regime, a paramount example of the link between nationalist associations of race and place, identity documentation, and border control, as well as guest and temporary worker programs that allow border crossing only for the purpose of labor exploitation. Now normalized practices of abandoning people in refugee camps, as we've just been hearing about, incarcerating people in secretive detention centers, and interrupting migrant routes, again, as we've just been hearing about, in order to push people into life-threatening environments, show the centrality of racism for creating categories of the disposable and killable, and the lengths to which countries in the global north will go to restrict the entry of brown people from the global south because they lack entry documents. Such outcomes will only increase with the emergence of smart borders that use a combination of biometric and other data sets to manage mobility. Since racial profiling is allowed by the US Department of Homeland Security and by border security operations in the EU and Canada, there's no doubt that smart borders will continue to utilize racial criteria to target immigrants, most especially the undocumented, for scrutiny and disposability. The fourth pillar is labor exploitation. So even while engineering the most highly elaborated border controls ever, the global north still remains dependent on the labor of border crossers for a huge variety of jobs. Because the demand for cheap labor confronts the fortress mentality, many countries in the global north have created complex, layered forms of what Maple Rasa and his colleague call hierarchical integration, policies that allow the entry of temporary migrants to perform certain economic functions while denying them basic rights of self-determination, democratic participation, and civil protections, just like South Africa's pass law system. In fact, guest worker programs in the global north are modeled on South Africa's pass system to regulate Black labor for the benefit of white employers. They are specifically designed to create a flexible, replaceable, disempowered, and disposable workforce that cannot make demands on the host country and that will not challenge the cultural integrity of the host culture. Now turning to number 5, the militarized global apartheid apparatus. The global north is now investing massively in militarized border regimes that reach far beyond the territorial borders to manage the movement of people from the global south, both to create an exploitable labor force and to contain those considered undesirable or expendable in detention centers or refugee camps far from the borders of the global north. In arguing that the phrase militarized global apartheid best captures the emergent world order of structures of control, my argument signals the normalized specter of boats filled with migrants from North Africa and the Middle East that sink in the Mediterranean, while ships bearing European national flags stand by watching but not assisting, of boats filled with refugees from Burma and Afghanistan, turned away by the Australian government when they request help, of US Border Patrol policies that channel Mexicans and Central Americans into the most extreme parts of the Sonoran Desert to starve or die of dehydration, of women from South and Southeast Asia forced to give up their officially stateless babies to orphanages in the Gulf countries where they are deported, for having become pregnant in violation of their work contracts. And of course, of a former US president who gained popularity by calling for policies to deport all Muslims and to build border walls against Latinos. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for that powerful presentation. We will next turn to Azra Hromadjić, who is going to give us an intimate account of the situation at the Bosnian border in her hometown, Bihać. Thank you, Azra.
Thank you, Saida, and thank you, everyone. It's really humbling to be in this company. I don't study migration, so I feel a little bit like an outsider. At the same time, I know these spaces intimately, and what I will hopefully provide is a couple of fragmented, intimate notes from the field that I captured because I happened to be there. So I don't see the top of my slides, so if I don't tell you the subject line, please, just forgive me for that. So just a quick outline about what I'm going to talk about. First, the introduction, and as if I knew what Saida would use in her introduction today, I put context in quotation marks just because I think that the boundaries, the conceptual boundaries of context here obviously need to be expanded, especially based on Catherine's presentation of how to think these kind of cellular forms of power that are creating new pathways through spaces we call context, typically in anthropology. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to quickly hint at and say hi to Catherine's amazing framework for this work, and try to situate my notes within that framework. Then I'm going to move to zoom into 8 of these encounters that I captured while I was in the field, and they are listed as war, nature, infrastructure, protest, Fortress Europe and Bosnian Gaza, the game, Vučjak, and Lipa the Beautiful. We'll see how far I go. If I go over my time, please say that, tell me, and I'll stop. And then I'll try to create some sort of conclusion. So luckily, Nidžara already beautifully explained Bosnian kind of geography and history when it comes to this particular subject. She also did mention that the Bihać region since March 2018 emerged as the newest hotspot on the so-called Balkan migrant route. I happened to be in Bihać doing a totally different research on a totally different topic in that March of 2018. And I was able to witness what this waiting at the militarized border, waiting to cross into the European Union, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? How migranti, as they're referred to by the local population, how they manage and navigate everyday living with, next to, and among the people of Bihać. So I understand Bihać, again, to return to this notion of context as something that we have to reconceptualize, possibly. I think about Bihać as a contingent circulation, not as a bounded territory when it comes to this particular subject. I think about it also in the context of Catherine's presentation as a nod as a nod produced through intersecting moving pathways where objects and subjects kind of stick to each other, creating a certain form of thickening of bodies and souls and objects and subjects. As I said, I happen to be in the field, and I'm using the field again in quotation marks because these are other people's homes and lives in my own hometown, witnessing yet another transformation of Bihać. This was uncanny, personal, and paralyzing. It was dystopian, it was dislocating, and not only in terms of people who were moving and trying to cross into the EU, but also for the local populations. And I think Nidžara hinted at that as well, who felt dislocated in place. And Latour, in his recent work, spent some time thinking about what does it mean to be in place, but feeling dislocation. And I felt hunted to a large extent by déjà vu and novelty, and by similarity and congruence to the war and post-war setting. So at the same time, in this space, in this nod, in one of these many nods, but I'm only going to focus on Bihać nod, in this larger militarized global apartheid, refugees, migrants, bodies, souls, journalists, politicians, project experts, researchers started to stick together. There was an influx of money, influx of control, as Nidžara also already mentioned, but also influx of projects and influx of people interested in witnessing what was happening on the ground. My goal, as I started writing, I didn't research this topic. I actually decided to start writing a journal, and my goal was to kind of journal about multiple and intimate encounters between people of Bihać and Migranti, and the ethnographer herself, a migrant of sorts. So my kind of entries are, as I said, intimate kind of reflections on these encounters I was visiting, and not kind of theoretical interventions. And at the same time, I established a new kind of field legitimacy. I feel this field legitimacy is being demonstrated here as well. I'm not a student of migration, but many friends, colleagues, people I admire, who some of them are in this audience today, who know much more about topics of migration, started asking me to meet, to arrange, to write, to speak, to engage, to contribute, to reflect, to help, to connect, to respond, to critique. So suddenly the fact that I was from Bihać and that I have been studying Bihać for a long time gave me a new kind of field legitimacy that I'm still a little bit awkwardly occupying here and hesitantly. So just to kind of, I didn't know how much Catherine would say, but when I listened to her talk today and a couple of weeks ago, she visited Syracuse University via Zoom, so I heard some of this before. When I think about these notions of North and South in the context of global militarized global apartheid, I think about assemblages of power, ideology, surveillance, technology, through which the global North regulates, racializes, polices, migranti, and others. From the global South. And sorry if I'm butchering your framework, Catherine. And Bihać, as I said, becomes one node, right, in a security imperialism formation that actually challenges to some extent what I understand a global apartheid to be, to some extent, the scalar, right, still spatialized idea of North-South and central periphery and state region. So we can talk more about this later. And Bihać becomes a place actually to capture what, for example, this militarized global apartheid and its regulating technological surveillances look like, feel like, sound like, move like. What overlapping geopolitical formations and socio-historical encounters emerge from in these kinds of nods, and what kinds of responses and grammars of articulation do they generate? And I'm going to address these questions from the local people's perspective. What kind of anthropology at the end could take these contemporary migrant encounters in Bihać seriously and situated within these larger technological security and geopolitical formations? I don't have a good answer what kind of anthropology it is. I actually struggled to write anthropologically about this, and I ended up writing an essay. Almost wanted to write a poetry, actually, because I was not prepared analytically to grapple with this. As I say, poetry, I ended up writing notes and essay-like response to the situation. So here are my notes, and they're actually organized temporarily, not conceptually, as I was actually coming to Bihać at different times. And I have to give a nod here to Amir Husak, who took two of the black and white pictures on the side. Hopefully Amir is in the audience. I don't know if he is. So one of the ways in which new grammars of encounter in these zones of militarized global apartheid articulated itself in Bihać was through the grammar of war. So this grammar of war provided both solidarity, and somebody, I think Daniela in the chat asked, what are these transgressive solidarities that are emerging? So here is one moment of solidarity that people articulated on the ground that also provided a distance. We know what it's like, local people would say, because we were refugees too. And this allowed for certain kind of understanding because local people insisted that they were not like the others who mistreated the migrants, that they understood what it meant to be on the move, what it meant to be subject to these regimes. They often said, we understand them, right? But we also wish them gone, right? And this is where, these kinds of simultaneous solidarities and expulsions can articulate themselves. Social realities are complicated. So it's not just purely solidarity and or immediately racism. It's both things at once. So what are some articulations of these kind of complicated histories of different wars? For example, here are images of migranti sleeping in the partisan graveyard in Bihać that was erected after the Second World War to commemorate the partisans who died from the Bihać region, who died during the Second World War. Now, this graveyard was very close to one of the initial camps in Bihać, and many of the migrants actually found rest next to these graveyards. So this was one of those moments that I kind of tried to think about. And these encounters, right, created novel historical intimacies and layers of bones and flesh, cement and grass, visible and invisible, names, lives, and deaths. The other example of wars coming together was a migrant who I saw walking nearby this place, actually wearing the shirt that had written on it, never forget Srebrenica, referencing the biggest genocide that took place during the Bosnian War. And there was this shirt-wearing migrant, who knows from where, wearing this Srebrenica referencing shirt. And this moment to me was so overwhelming, unbearable in this topic. It created the limit, right? The limit of existential, methodological, and semantic. The second grammar, right, of this encounter is nature. So nature was one of very common reference through which militarization and surveillance spoke in the local context. So the majority of people who were traveling or who got stuck on the Balkan migrant route in Bihać spent their time around the beautiful Una River, which was their source of hygiene and possibly moments of joy. And we see them here on the right, washing themselves in their clothes in the Una River. The residents of Bihać understood this to some extent. They often talked about where else would they go to wash. They were inclusive, saying they know how to properly use public spaces, as one of the architects said. At the same time, they were alarmed, and these alarming discourses were multidimensional, often combining compassion and racism and xenophobia, and concern and care. For example, there was a rumor that the migrants were eating the river ducks, and the river ducks are actually people's pets. They bring their children to feed these ducks every day. This is one of the routines of habitual things that people in Bihać do. Another one was the reference of how much feces were actually around the river and the path around the river. As one of my friends I was walking with by the river, who was stepping over the feces, was saying, look, this is now the road of shit, referencing that on the other side of the river is actually Put Avnoy, or the Avnoy Road, one of the main roads built during socialism that signaled modernity and progress. So there were many of these kind of historical references that signaled certain kind of dystopic reality. Also, another example was Borići, or Small Pines, which is an area close to the partisan graveyard that was actually forested by socialist youth. And now you can see now on the right-hand side here, these are Borici, who this was the lungs of the city. People would go and exercise there. However, because one of the makeshift camps early on was in this area, many migrants had to use the bark from the trees to keep warm. And many people said, we understand that, but they also felt that this was something that was a wound, basically. They felt that these were the lungs of the city that were actually destroyed through this out of necessity, but also still a wound. So at one point, the one interlocutor who didn't know the context well, he looked at these pictures and he asked me if these were the pine beetles. And to me, this was such a telling moment in which the question literally collapsed the boundary between the human and non-human, where migrants and invasive others collapsed into one dangerous category. Also, nature plays a very important role through which militarized border regimes are articulated. You see here on the very far right, this is the Pljaševica mountain, the main route for many migrants from Bihać to try to cross over to Croatia. The border runs through the mountain itself, and this was recently bulldozed area of the mountain that the Croatian police did in order to surveil the migrant movement in Bihać, and many people were both talking about this hunting game, is a horrible spectacle of security apparatus at the same time as they were regretting the view from their windows that was forever, they felt, gone and insulted. Another example of local grammar is infrastructure, oftentimes socialist infrastructure. This also is a nod to Nidžara's presentation when she talked early on about the factory. Many of these factories in which migrants are now located are former socialist industrial modernizing technologies. One example that I captured here, again, next to the Una River, is this nursing home, which is a never completed socialist retirement home. And this unfinished building, instead of its imagined inhabitants, who were elderly socialist workers who were going to age and die in it peacefully, this building that never housed these elderly workers because it was being built at the time when the war started. This building has been housing first transitions, Bosnian transitions, disillusioned youth, many of whom there were attempted suicides in this building as well as places of doing homework together and singing together and enjoying sex and drugs together. More recently, this is the place that the migrants are staying in. These are extremely unfavorable social and material conditions born out of Dom's dangerous physicality, never completed socialist project, continue to produce violence and death, including the death of 37-year-old man from Afghanistan who fell through the open elevator shaft and broke his spine, which led to his death. The fourth, this was written in October 2018, the fourth entry in my diary was so-called Planet Sarajevo, or the political protest that many media in the region reported about. People in Bihać, after 6 months, exactly 6 months of feeling that they were left alone to help and manage to some extent the situation in the town itself, they felt uncared for by their government, and as we heard from Nidžara, from the non-existent state, as well as misunderstood, alone, and very exhausted. This erupted in protests in October of 2018 that by the outsiders was characterized as racist and xenophobic. And to me, it's really interesting that these kinds of accusations replace the language of ethnicity and nationalism. So former nationalists became new racists and xenophobics. And while obviously the language of racism and affect of racism and xenophobia was definitely present at the protest, and not only the protest, it's only one element of this larger assemblage of affect. So most local people, when they read these evaluations of what they were protesting about, felt hurt by these interpretations and shocked to some extent. So many of them actually said that what they were trying to do is to interpolate the state to act, because this problem is not a city problem. The mayor shouldn't be handling it. this is a state level problem, but because the state is empty and there was no response, the state was not interpolated. So many people, as you see here at the bottom, it says država brini se za svoje građane, pobrini se za svoje građane, or the state take care of your citizens. And the state, they felt, did not respond, did not appear. Another, to me, maybe one of the most kind of capturing references and grammars of articulation in these spaces of intimate encounter is the notion of Bosnian Gaza that some of my informants, some of the people I talked to in Bihać referenced. So many people were very angry and kind of ironic and sarcastic about the nature of European care, where in Tikhtin's terms, this was form of armed love where care replaced cure. That one, some people were saying this form of care, the regime of European care was turning the Bihać node into European Gaza Strip. And Gaza here is both definitely a geographical place, right? It's a place that really exists, but it's something more. It's another attempt to articulate these nodes, these spaces of thickening and sticking of bodies and souls and objects and monies and etc. So Gaza becomes a place in the world besieged by palpable militarized border, where contemporary, local and elsewhere, human and non-human waste is dumped, monitored, attempted to be depoliticized, kept as a labor reserve, and contained. Another example I captured was the soccer game. As a true soccer fan, every time I'm in Bihać, I go to these games, and this is again my kind of language game between soccer game and the game. That's the terminology that migrants use when they try to cross into the EU and Croatia. So to some extent by accident, the soccer stadium in Bihać is next to one of the IOM run migrant camps. It's also a former student dorm. It was during the socialist times. And many refugees and migrants come to the local soccer games, and they sometimes right before they start their own game. And one time, as in March 2018, as I was watching the local team's game, as we were leaving the stadium, and there were many migrants and refugees present cheering the local team, we encountered a group of migrants walking towards us on their way to Pljaševica mountain, starting their game. Their steps were determined and in sync. They walked in an army marching formation. Their steps were regular, ordered, and synchronized. And the person I was with commented that they are using the same route to cross that we used to illegally cross into Croatia during the war to escape the siege. This comment collapsed the time geography between the two events. Refugees near and far blended into a sea of walking humanity, the so-called human flow, seemingly without history. I imagined, and this is a snippet from the essay, I imagined this group marching in their decomposing tennis shoes, sleeping in the snow-covered, landmine decorated mountain that night. If they're captured, they will be most probably beaten up by the Croatian police and forcefully returned to Bihać. Their few possessions will be taken, and then they will try again, sometimes over 10 times, until they finally reach what one refugee called a place of peace in the fortress Europe, which is decorated with the discourse of human rights and politics of barbed wire. Or they might freeze in the snow-covered mountain, never to be identified. It's a game after all. Two more entries. One is called Vučjak, which is one of the camps, and I loved that Nidžara said the ugly camps. One of the camps that was receiving lots of attention when the mayor of Bihać moved forcefully migrants and refugees from the city to one of these locations. This place called Vučjak, etymologically, Vučjak stems from vukovi or wolves, connoting a daunting place where wilderness and animals dominate over humans. In this place, people were dehumanized, and these immobile humans were suspended in time and place, were literally sleeping and waiting on tons of toxic garbage. Vučjak is a former landfill. Surrounded by still unexploded landmines from the most recent war. There were 3 explosions near Vučjak since the war ended and encircled by wolves. The heavy human activity on top of the landfill produced untreated human waste, feces, and garbage, which are seeping into the porous soil. According to some experts and experiments, these contaminants need less than 1 day to travel underground to reach one of the main freshwater springs in town called Klakot, here on the right-hand side, ironically circling back into the bodies of local people. Here's another one of those intimate convergences of bodies and souls. Finally, Lipa the Beautiful. Lipa was the biggest migrant crisis and humanitarian tragedy in Bihać to date. I returned to Bihać in January 2021 for personal reasons, but I ended up again being there when one of these extremely difficult situations unfolded that Saida began our presentations with today. Lipa is a village 26 kilometers from town. Lipa is the linden tree. It is also etymologically related to Lijepa, or colloquially Lipa, meaning beautiful. The main idea was to move the thousands of migrants from the Bira complex that Nidžara showed in one slide, the former refrigeration appliances factory in downtown Bihać, another relic of the socialist past, to Lipa. The camp was supposed to be fully equipped and developed by the Bosnian state and IOM so that thousands of people could spend the 2020-21 winter in the camp. However, the necessary infrastructural work never happened, leaving around 1,000 people in precarious position this past December when the bitter cold arrived. Once again, Sarajevo-based politicians and the EU accused the locals of inhumane treatment of migranti. While some locals guarding Bira expressed racist and xenophobic sentiments, most Bihać people and migranti joined their voices in demanding from the EU and the state to provide solutions to their intertwined predicament. As one person told me, možda mi migranti trebamo zajedno Sarajevo pred zgradu vlade. Maybe we and the migrants together should join and go to protest in front of government building in Sarajevo. The locals continue to safeguard Bira today, while clearly articulating an increasing sense of displacement and betrayal. Their anger, punctured with disappointment, sheds light on the contemporary and uneven geopolitical formations and prolific corruption and depolitization of the European humanitarian action. Migranti, on the other hand, started a hunger strike while articulating their situated and displaced humanity. Their insistent telling of their stories and their frost-bitten bodies painfully irradiate the immense ugliness of Lipa the Beautiful. To conclude, this was an intimate portrayal of lives displaced as they unfold in one of the nods that history of post-colonialism, post-war, post-socialism, and militarized global apartheid produce. New grammars and ways of living together, in tension with each other, reveal viscosity of race and class, solidarity of religion and war experience, and articulation of these tensions via war, nature, culture, infrastructure, sports, protests, and games. I do not think we have a good analytical apparatus in anthropology to grasp these emerging, converging, and swollen sociopolitical, geopolitical, and affective formations and ways of being in the world. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Azra. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our presenters for their illuminating and powerful presentations. I would like to open the panel to questions and answers. One of our guiding questions for today has been how and whom we demand accountability for this particular node that is Bihać, but it is also Bosnia as a whole, of global apartheid, and of whom. And one way to answer that question is to ask what's already happening. And so I would like to start us off with the first question we received from Daniela Majstorović, who asks, could you tell us about the forms of transgressive solidarity among those helping people on the move? And so what is already happening and what is not happening that should be happening? I'd like to pose that question to all of our panelists.
I can try. I'm not sure I have the answer to what Daniela is asking, but I do wish to mention the word solidarity and what's happening here. And but also I have to say that from what's happening, not only in Bosnia, I'm present on the Balkan route since 2015, and I have been everywhere around, from Turkey, all around the Balkans. First of all, the situation is getting worse and worse every day. So what I can see now, it's much worse than what I could have seen back in 2015 and 16 in Greece or any of the country. There is more violence, and the violence became normality in these countries. Unfortunately, I will stop. I mean, my connection, I lost connection, but I wanted to show you how the EU pushed the violence inside the camps financed and run by the IOM in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that's the daily occurrence here. When I talk about solidarity, I have to say that, first of all, I learned a lot about solidarity from Greeks. And when I was in Greece, being a part of solidarity, trying to be a part of solidarity networks that exist there, not only with the Greeks, but also with many international volunteers who I was lucky enough to meet people who were there with the idea of solidarity. However, from 2015 until today, what I can see that solidarity, not that it's dying, but it is losing and changing its meaning for people from Europe. We still see solidarity in the very different way from volunteers who are coming here. And also the way how people in Bosnia react, for me, is until today, I admire them. What they do is much more than solidarity. Not all, of course, there is a racism, there is many other ugly things, but most of the people will show you the solidarity in the way that they will treat the people who are now here in Bosnia in completely equal way. So what is happening now during the month of Ramadan, and this what will I do when this finish, many people who are living in Bosnia in different cities, like I'm in Sarajevo, they cook iftars, so evening meals, for as many people as they can, and in the evening they go out on the streets and they distribute it to everybody who needs it. And they are doing that. They are helping also to migrants. That's solidarity, because we share the meal, we share everything. We are equal at this moment. When I see solidarians or people, volunteers coming from European Union, it's usually charity. It's ugly, it's painful. I survived the war. I used to receive charity. It's very humiliating. It's for nobody. And I often ask myself, do Europe still remember what solidarity is? Do people in Europe understand that word? And do they know how to act in solidarity? Because everything I can see here coming from people from the Northwest is a power game and charity. To us, solidarity is left like the only thing that we still can hold on to and try to build and try to build together with people on the move who are here with us, a world where solidarity will rule and when we will all be equal and not depend on somebody's charity.
Can I add something? Because it's really adding literally. I think Daniela's question is interesting to me because of this notion of transgression. Because I'm trying to think what is solidarity that's not transgressive? I mean, what makes it transgressive? So if I'm going, this is what many people did, especially initially. I would go, somebody would tell me, there's somebody from Zagreb would contact me and say, there's a person in Bihać. He was dumped there. He never actually went through Bosnia, but he ended up being dumped back into Bosnia. Can you go with him to the post office and get through Western Union, use your documents to get, there's money waiting for him, but he cannot access it. So many people ended up actually doing this. So this is a form of transgression because it's illegal to do that, but people did it. At the same time, there were many instances, like really seemingly mundane instances of making tea for people who were frozen, you know, by Izačić border crossing, staying up all night, collecting blankets, giving lots. So these are, to me, these are all transgressive forms of solidarity, because they were not. This was not something that people were encouraged to do, and they acted, and the whole time, right? They were saying that this is we are different, right? We do think that we are taking a different approach to the people who are suffering because we know what it's like, and that's definitely something I hear a lot. This kind of solidarity in terms of experiences of the past that are similar, not unique in their own sufferings, but also in some ways, you know, similar to the point of recognition. However, there is a limit to this solidarity, and that limit is that, okay, I'll provide all this, but I don't need to know your individual story. I don't need to know your history. There's still certain kind of limit to that kind of transgression in solidarity. I didn't hear many people really wondering about individual stories. I mean, there was a blending of this kind of history that, you know, many people were kind of blending into sea of humanity, and many individual histories were erased. So at least that's my experience from what I've seen.
I would just add to these examples of solidarity and accompaniment, which is the term I'm sort of using to gloss what Azra's example, which are local level ways of establishing mutual community, reciprocity, a sense of being in a place together that I think exist everywhere. And I think, you know, those are incredibly, incredibly powerful local movements. But I also think that there are some other ways that we're seeing transgressions, you know, potential transgressions or pushback against these militarized regimes of controlling mobility. So I live in Maine in the United States, and we have movements around things like changing laws around who can access free medical care and making those access to those programs be completely available to everybody regardless of citizenship status. We're also seeing mobilizations against ICE, which is the deportation arm of our Department of Homeland Security. They want to build an ICE facility in Maine. People are protesting and blocking that. And so, you know, these are efforts to both contain the role of the state and the role of the state's ability to respond militarily to the presence of undocumented migrants and refugees, which is sort of the other side of the extension of forms of accompaniment and solidarity that the other panelists have talked about.
I'd also like to add those kinds of the forms of solidarity that include drawing attention to the various instances of border apartheid. Some of the things that I've learned, for instance, from German or Dutch or Austrian organizations and sometimes individuals who are working and that are working on these questions. And so that that's another form of solidarity, right? As well as the presence of people who are trying to make visible what the border does or doesn't do. There are artistic collectives, there are active advocacy collectives that, for instance, invite citizens of the EU to bring refugees with them, to cross them into the EU illegally, right, breaking the law. So those things do happen as well. But nonetheless, what I hear from the presenters is something that many anthropologists who study humanitarianism have been pointing out for a long time, which is there's a constitutive tension between solidarity and inequality within humanitarianism. And the line between humanitarianism and charity is a very, very porous line, right? So another question that we received is about the terminology itself. So Gina Vukojevic asks a question, do you have a sense of local genealogies of migranti? So why is that word used? Is it a term that was used prior to 2015? And if so, in what ways? So why migrants and not refugees in the local parliament?
It's very different for us. I have to, and sorry, I'm smiling a little bit, but at the moment you can see 3 persons from Bosnia. One is, where are you, Azra? I forget. I mean, we are we are migrants. Bosnia is a country of migrants. A migrant lives in my surname, which is Ahmetašević. So there is some Ahmet who came from Turkey long time ago here. More than 2 million people left Bosnia during the war. They are all migrants or whatever around the world. It's not, I mean, there is nothing ugly about that. We are all migrants. That's a nature, that's a history, that's how the world exists. So I see it as it's just, I mean, I can use the term people on the move, but it comes to the same. For us, being a migrant does not, even though a representative of IOM tried to put it in that way, but being a migrant does not have a bad connotation, because we are a nation of migrants, and that's how we very often refer to ourselves and to people who migrated from Bosnia in the 90s or even before, during the socialism or whenever. So as I said, more than 2 million people left Bosnia during the war. They never came back, and all of them are migrants.
Do you want to respond, Azra?
Okay, I'll say something. I'm just thinking on top of my head. I thank you, Gina, for this question. I actually did something, and now I have to reflect on that. In my title, I put refugees first, and then I replaced it with migrants. Because, you know, there's local term, migranti, that's the one that circulates. But also, I don't think I did it only to, you know, reflect the EMIC terminology, but more to kind of push back against this distinction between refuginess and migration that, you know, many times is done in order to emphasize that many of these people are called migrantes, so they cannot receive a proper status. And there's a political stake in this, obviously. This is a really important distinction. At the same time, I think something is being lost in kind of insistence on it for us analytically. So I wanted to be fluid. And try to be, and if you paid attention, I constantly switched it. And while I know politically it makes a difference, at the same time, I feel that something is being violated also if we insist on such a distinction, because something is being violated from the experience and from hierarchy again, you know, creating certain kinds of hierarchies. So I wanted to slip. I intentionally was slipping in my presentation between the two.
Thank you very much, Azra. We have a question from Maple Raza, who asks, what can you say about the ways that Bosnians' marginalization from Europe in its multiple dimensions has been exploited by the EU to enlist Bosnia into the EU border regime and militarized global apartheid? So we heard some of the nuts and bolts of this from Nidžara in her presentation, but if we could kind of give an overarching explanation, that might be wonderful.
I'm sure Azra can do it in much better way, but like I have to say this, that I do feel that people on the move, migrants, refugees, whatever, people who came here since 2018 are stuck together with us here in between European Union, in between the borders, and neither of us are welcome. And that's very, very sad. We are a periphery of Europe. Nobody cares. And the situation that I explained about this Frankenstein state will tell you exactly where the place of Bosnian people is in today's Europe, as well as anybody from the region. It's not only about the Bosnia. I mean, like Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro, all of us are just, we are forever stuck here. So, you know, the big thing that makes a difference between me and people on the move that I meet every day, they still have a hope and dreams that they will leave this space. I will stay here, looks like forever, because there is no way out.
I'm really curious about this question because, you know, I'm not a Europeanist, and so my reading has been on the sort of the disciplining imperatives of what it will require of states to be allowed to join the EU, the way in which the EU sort of wields a particular kind of power. This is what it means to be European. This is what you have to do to be let in. And, I would say to the lager, which is, of course, a South African apartheid-like term. But it's been interesting to me as I've read about this, the impact first on Spain, which was one of the first European countries to really begin developing its militarization of its borders against African immigrants, and then the way that EU set of imperatives was then imposed on Greece, the way it's now been extended to be imposed on the Balkans, and the terms for membership seem to be delineated so profoundly towards forcing countries on the periphery to demonstrate their willingness and their ability to turn huge resources towards policing the unwanted, policing migrants, as sort of the definitive expression of being able to prove themselves as worthy of, being allowed to join the EU. So I'm really curious from Nidžara and Azra to hear if that's your impression as well.
I think Maple is probably better positioned to answer this question than I am. I mean, this is exactly what he, to some extent, studies. But I would say that, Croatia is in a very particular position here because they have to demonstrate to the rest of the EU that they're doing proper policing. So I hear oftentimes from activists in Croatia that I'm in touch with and wonderful anthropologists who are studying these things that they're so hyper aware of how much Croatia is feeling as a European periphery that has to demonstrate proper surveillance and proper techniques of management. And then on the other side of the border in Bosnia, last time I crossed that border, I noticed a new formation, which is a huge metal gate. And it's so symbolic, it was open, but people are aware of it, that you can close that gate. And yes, there's porous areas around it, but the symbolism of that kind of closure. I think Gaza here is such a powerful analytic to hint at these, the ways in which many Bosnians are feeling that they're being somehow even further excluded. Right, Gaza is elsewhere, right, geopolitically, and that reference to me, I didn't do enough in my piece. I think there's something that I'm again speaking from the point of view of local population, not necessarily state officials, that people feel even further away, removed from the EU. At the same time, masses of young people are still crossing, going to Germany to work, planning to do so, preparing to do so, hibernating, kind of ready to go, taking their German B level, whatever it is, in order to be able to be accepted. So there is also a certain kind of development, right, of self, investment in education, investment of being European, that's simultaneously happening as people are being at the same time kind of, in quotation marks, geopolitically pushed away from Europe in so many ways. So I think both are happening at the same time. And it's interesting that Krajina, Bihać is the region where this is being articulated, because it is yet one of the regions with the biggest number of people leaving as well, going to mostly Germany. So it's kind of, I think it's both things at once, feeling very much working hard on being folded in, and knowing what that folding in looks like individually, and then collectively, feeling like Gaza, right, in so many ways. So I don't know if this answers the question, but that's
if I just may add, I always feel this need, for whatever reason, to say it's not only Croatian doing this horrific violence toward people. All the countries around the Balkans are doing the same. Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Greece is doing like horrible. Now we have a Frontex. So even countries in the region are doing that. But we hear more and more reports about pushbacks from Germany toward Slovenia, then Croatia, then Bosnia. From Switzerland last week, I have one case of a person who was pushed from Switzerland after 8 months. We have many cases in Austria, everywhere. And the violence is always a way how they do it. And then they push it into the Balkan, push it, like they push the genocide here, ignoring everything that is happening, ignoring fascism, and now the fascism came to their door. So it's happening again. They ignored what was happening to us in the 90s. Now they ignore what is happening here, and it's very dangerous. And I'm very sad that the Western society people, I'm not talking now with politicians, did not learn the lesson from Bosnia from the 90s. And that they have to repeat it now. And they wonder, why do you have fascism now? Because you let Karadzic kill all people here and Milosevic. You let them out. And now you cannot stop it. You let me die for you. I survived. Probably the West is not very happy because we survived. But you opened the door and the evil is out. And you let us die. And you are doing that to this space again. And now different people are also present, but they're not worth of solidarity. They will be given a charity. They will be given some rice in a plate, but not the chance to live.
I mean, what this makes me think is, what does it do for Catherine's thinking about, boundaries and militarized regimes? And because as I was listening to you, Catherine, I was thinking about Syracuse. Downtown Syracuse is one of these nodes as well, to some extent, because there are people from all sorts of places coming through regimes of incorporation that are keeping them as labor, as perpetual kind of labor reservoir, and who work in meat packing companies by Cornell, the night shift. And so, pulling in Nidžara's comments, so many of these kind of, I'm trying to spatialize this north-south, right? Which I know you're not literally using, but how should we think about, is the boundary in Switzerland? Where are these articulations of it? Where news, should we shift our gaze from Croatian, Bosnian to German, boundaries of neighborhoods? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, thinking about your project in relation to what Nidžara said.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the side conversations along the way. As you and I have discussed, this is sort of a broad brush, overarching framework that I've been trying to develop to think about whose interests are served by the racialized control of mobility. What is actually happening kind of on a global level. Its expression in particular locations, or as you say, nodes, will perhaps carry a similar set of features, but will articulate with the local contexts in different places. And I'm acutely interested in these ethnographic spaces, in documenting how are these tensions and conflicts and structures and frameworks and hierarchies being worked out in particular localities. The form that race takes, the form that xenophobia takes, looks different in different places. But I still think that this overarching framework captures what is happening in these nodes, in these locations all over the world. And so in terms of the rough differentiation between the global north and the global south, which is not, actually, I'm not really talking about just the north, the south, that's a symbolic, that sort of hierarchy is being worked out within spaces in the global north and within spaces in the global south as well. And I think that's really, really important to say. It's not that the global north is a monolithic force supervising and policing the global south, and the global south is, sort of this universally, subjugated set of countries and populations. Not at all. There are these cross-cutting security logics that I'm also really, really interested in tracking and tracing. But I don't think that, well, I'll stop there.
I would like to thank all the participants who asked several additional excellent questions, and I would like to invite you, the participants, to actually email them to the panelists. That would be wonderful. We will be gladly answering them by email, but we do have to end the panel here. And I'm so grateful to Azra, Catherine, and Nidžara for their wonderful presentations that illuminated so much. And I hope this is just the beginning of many conversations. So thank you again. Thank you to Pamela and everybody from IS for helping make this happen. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.